In this episode, we're going to take a look at Izotope RX, and specifically, we're going to look at the leveler module. Now, if you're coming here and you want just a set of numbers you can use to dial this in for your own audio, you're dismissed. We don't do that here. What we're covering instead is teaching you how to use the leveler to adjust its settings to fit your particular case. So if you're interested in that, let's dive in. First of all, let me play a little bit of this recording here so you can see where we're starting.
As a parent, after a child attempts suicide, it can be one of the most difficult, confusing times in a parent's life. And oftentimes they blame themselves. Is there anything you can say to a parent during this time?
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. This is one of the more shocking, complicated events in a family life. And, one thing we often say to parents is to not be so hard on yourself.
Okay, so that's where we're starting. Let me give you some background here. So obviously we have two people here. It's an interview situation. They're both actually recorded with a single boom microphone on a stand, boomed above both of them. It seems like it's aimed more closely at the man who is talking and less at the woman. And as a result, his voice is substantially louder. It also might be the timbre of his voice is just a little bit more powerful. But her voice also sounds a little bit, I would say, like she has a bit of a lisp, and I think largely that is because of the way the microphone's positioned. So my first thing here is that I would highly, highly recommend that if you're very serious about a particular piece, use a microphone for each of the people involved. However, let's talk about what we can do in these situations when that wasn't the case. So let's go ahead and measure, first of all, if I just take a look here, I highlight the woman's voice here. You can see that she's coming in at an integrated loudness of minus 30 LUFS. That's just a way of measuring perceived loudness. It's a better way of measuring it than just looking at the dB or max dB. So just keep that in mind. And then the man's voice here, we measure that. He's coming in at minus 27. So he's a full 3 LUFS louder, basically. And you can actually hear it to some extent. He is definitely louder. Now, let's talk about how to use this leveler to help even that out a little bit. Obviously, there are a whole bunch of other problems we need to address here, and we can come back to do those in future episodes. But first, let's look at the leveler. Now, we have a couple of stats here at the top. We have total RMS, max RMS, and min RMS. What RMS stands for is root mean square. It's kind of an averaging way to look at the overall dB level of this audio. It's not a good way to measure loudness. It's kind of an old school way of doing it, kind of a quick and dirty way of doing it. And the reason that we care about it here is for a couple things. So the total RMS kind of gives us a sense for what the average overall loudness level is, and we can use the target level to dial that in. So what we're looking at here is we're starting at minus 25 dB RMS, and I really just kind of want to keep it there. I don't want to change that. I just want to even it out some. So I'm going to set my target level to minus 26, which is basically right around minus 25.4. Now we also have this max RMS and min RMS, and this gives us a sense for what our total dynamic range is. So this is our loudest overall sound in this sample, and here's our lowest overall sound. And we're going to use that here as a kind of a measure when we're looking at preserved dynamics. So next thing I want to set here is responsiveness. Now, to give you a sense of what this is about, responsiveness essentially tells the leveler how quickly to respond. So if you move it more to the left, the lower numbers, then what that means is it's going to respond faster, and it could start to affect one syllable in a word, but it wouldn't necessarily touch another syllable in a word. Or it might adjust the first syllable in a word down and the second syllable in the word up. So it's a little bit more responsive, it acts more quickly. If you want something that's smoother, you can move it over here to the right, and it will act more on a single word or even a phrase if you move it far enough to the right. So that's to give you a sense. I'm going to go ahead and leave this for starters here at 2 because we are interested in, substantially changing the overall levels here because we've got a 3 LUFS difference or loudness units full scale difference between the woman and the man. Next is preserved dynamics, and that's where these readings up here come in. We have a fairly dynamic recording here overall, ranging between minus 9 and minus 59, so about 50 dB, if you will, of dynamic range. And what we can do here is if we move the preserved dynamics to the left, we're essentially giving the leveler permission to change the dynamics to hit a more level overall recording. If I move it to the right, I'm going to tell it, don't get so crazy. It's going to, in other words, it won't adjust things nearly as much. And I guess that's another way you can think of this is preserved dynamics affects how much it can move any particular set of audio up or down in terms of overall amplitude. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and leave that at about 25. That's, again, I'm intentionally trying to change this audio, make him quieter and make her a little bit louder. Now we also have this S reduction and breath control. We're going to leave those off for this demonstration just so you can, I don't want those to muddy up the demonstration here. They're here because when you do leveling, you can sometimes end up increasing sibilance, which you'll then want to use S reduction to manage, or you can end up emphasizing breaths. And in fact, that you'll probably notice that will be the case here to some extent. So you could actually turn these on to keep the breaths from getting overemphasized and to keep the sibilance from getting overemphasized and becoming kind of shrill. So we're going to go ahead and ignore those. Let's go ahead and do our first run on this. Now, before I do that, what I want to do is go up to View and turn on Clip Gain. And what this does is this shows you here essentially what changes the leveler is making. And let me show you. I'm going to go ahead and run the leveler. All right, so you can essentially see how it's changed the gain of each part of the audio. And you can see it pulled down this spike right here, and it boosted the end of his sentence, which tended to get got very much quieter than the start of the sentence, and so it evened things out. You can see we have a change here in our overall dynamic range, so we went up, or our max RMS came down to -10, and our min RMS came up to -55. So we changed the dynamic range by about, I guess, let's see, 5603, about 4 dB overall. So it didn't change it a whole lot, but let's see what it did in terms of the overall loudness. If I highlight now the woman's voice, she's sitting at about -26. And if we highlight the man's voice, let's go to about here, he's at 25.6. So there's a substantially smaller difference between them. Now, what you might notice is kind of interesting here. Let me go ahead and turn the clip gain off for now. You can see that the transient peaks on his voice are still substantially higher than hers. I want to point this out because what a lot of people do is they just try to get the peaks to line up with each other, and that doesn't necessarily solve the problem. It's really important to use something like the loudness control or a loudness meter, because incidentally now at this point, let's go ahead and play through a little bit of this, but basically her voice and his voice actually sound about the same loudness. Here we go.
And oftentimes they blame themselves. Is there anything you can say to a parent during this time?
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. This is one of the more shocking, complicated events in a family life.
Okay, so you can see we still have lots of other issues to solve, but I think for the most part we have them leveled out pretty nicely, and we could take the next step in a future episode. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave those down below, and if you've not already subscribed, make sure you do that, and we'll be sure to get you more great videos on how to improve your lighting and sound for video. Talk to you soon.